Praise be to Jesus Christ and welcome to Catholic Forum. I'm your guest host, Alan Dunst. We're so happy you could join us today, and we hope that our conversation here in West Michigan finds you wherever you may be and draws you a little bit closer to Jesus Christ through His one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. One thing that we often like to do on Catholic Forum is to discuss the faith journeys of people who have entered the church or who have returned to the church, because many times those journeys contain lessons that the rest of us can both take to heart and learn from, and also to encourage us. Sometimes those lessons are as simple as God is with us. God does not give up on us. So we want to thank Marty Best for being with us here today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So Marty, let's kind of set the stage a little bit and talk about your upbringing. My understanding is that you felt your childhood was fairly good. And,
it was enviable.
Enviable.
Yes, it was. I have had the opportunity to hear lots of other people's stories and what they grew up, what kind of household they grew up in. Mm-hmm. And mine was Ward and June Cleaver were my mom and dad.
Oh my goodness.
And it was, I guess, next to picture perfect, as close as it could be. I mean, of course, there's lots of idiosyncrasies in any family interaction. You get a bunch of human beings that are trying to live together.
Sure.
And there are problems, but I mean, essentially, it was smooth sailing.
Oh, excellent. So now, did they raise you in the Catholic faith, or?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And they themselves were practicing and that kind of thing?
Absolutely.
So you had a pretty good, strong foundation.
Definitely.
At least growing up.
And in parochial schools all my through high school.
Okay. And so now at a certain point, so the train starts leaving the tracks a little bit, and you kind of maybe step away from the faith a little bit, or fall into weakness, human weakness. Tell us about kind of what happened and where your life kind of took a turn.
Well, I've heard Bishop Robert Barron say that his generation, which is my generation as well, was given a bunch of coloring books and balloons for, when Vatican II was rolled out. And so I think that may have played a part in the degree of faith that I practiced as I was growing up. And my understanding of God was more textbook understanding than it was a experiential kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so that being said, I'm very grateful for the textbook education that I had been given. However, when I got into high school and started hanging around with people that had different ideas, my concept of God being pretty much an absentee landlord, he was out there somewhere, but he wasn't necessarily paying that close attention to me, that I wasn't experiencing immediate negative consequences to my actions. So when I was about 15 and, the awkward social stage, I was introduced to alcohol, and actually I was familiar with it from other family functions, so it wasn't a totally new introduction, but I got to experience it on my own and in a social environment where my parents weren't. And it alleviated a lot of the stress, a lot of the discomfort that I experienced socially. And it became the panacea, even though some of the end results weren't all that great.
So were you kind of an awkward teenager? And what kind of things were you trying to ward off with that alcohol?
I think my own perspective of myself was as skewed as anybody's is. We're human beings, and we don't have the capacity to be objective with ourselves as much as we'd like to think we can. And so my fears and insecurities were very loud in between my ears. And so, yes, I was awkward. I didn't fit in.
So you were, drinking during high school, or now was that like during the day, or
quite literally
or
during the
partying
day.
at night, or that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, and being 15, it wasn't necessarily easy for me to get alcohol all the time, but when I could, I would sneak it into school and during a study hall, when there's not a whole lot of supervision and I'm in a wide open area, it wasn't too difficult to do.
My goodness. Okay.
And it wasn't a daily thing, but it happened often enough.
Yeah.
And it was, like I said, at that point in time, it was working. It was
Right.
doing what I wanted it to do.
Okay. And so as you're going through high school and you kind of self-medicating, so to speak, now did that continue on as you left high school? Did you?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, it escalated.
Okay.
And I was rather proud of the bar that I had in my back seat of my car. So yeah, I had gone to, at the time it was called JC, now CC.
Okay.
And I was pursuing a degree in some sort of engineering, mechanical or electrical engineering. And because of my alcohol abuse, I was failing at some of the more critical classes. And as it happened, at that same time, there was a hiring boom going on at a lot of the area employers, and one of the local employers made me an offer that I was not about to refuse. So I had convinced myself that I was going to put school on hold for a year, work, and then save up money so I didn't have to incur all that debt going to school. And they continued to pay me very well. I wound up getting married, and school became a non-issue because I didn't need it to make the money.
Right. And so you start your occupational life and your career there. What were you doing as for work?
I was working in a factory.
Factory work?
Yeah.
Okay. And the alcohol was still with you? You're still
Absolutely. And I found myself gravitating toward people that if they didn't drink just like me, at least I could go from one person to another, socially and say, this day I'll drink with this person because, this is their day to drink or whatever. and I could, in my own thinking, I could conceal the amount that I was drinking.
Gotcha. So now in this phase, is God playing a part in your life at all at this point?
Again, this is, hindsight being 2020, I can say yes, he definitely was. At that point in time, no. I had no awareness of it, yeah.
All right. And when now you got married, okay, and so now is your wife, is she a drinker, or is she kind of watching and saying, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah, pretty much.
Was she aware that you were a drinker when you got married? And that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and to describe what was going on with her, I couldn't tell you. Perhaps it was similar insecurities, that I had been experiencing, and so here's an opportunity to marry somebody who's got a decent job, and there's something lovable about me, maybe. Who knows? But yeah, and she was well aware of my drinking.
Okay. And she tried to get you to stop it all, or she kind of just bearing with it, or how's that?
A bit of both. I mean, she was trying to encourage me to not drink so much, and she probably endured a lot more than most people would have.
Okay. So now at a certain point, something changed. Something had to give, as they say.
Yeah, and there were things that were happening in my life. I had lost sight in my left eye. My wife and I, at that time, had lost a child. And, there were things that for normal people would have been, earth-shattering enough.
Mm-hmm. Kind of wake-up calls.
Yeah, wake-up calls at the very least. And for whatever reason, it didn't. I don't know where anybody else's bottom is. I know mine was relatively high, but still, those things, they should have been enough, but they weren't. And the encouragement to stop drinking continued, and I was feeling a need to get people off of my back, so I went to AOS, and then they said, well, you should be going to AA meetings. I thought, well, that'll get them off my back. So I started going to an occasional AA meeting, and I was sober and miserable for several months. And then at one point, I on the side would DJ. I had lots of PA equipment available and things, so I would use that to make a little bit of side money. And so I was DJing for a wedding reception some years ago, and I wound up starting to drink again. And that particular evening, I had started drinking, but I was not over the top intoxicated. So I knew of a friend that lived nearby. After I got done DJing for this wedding reception, I went to my friend's house, and I wound up getting quite intoxicated, enough so that I could not drive home without raising the attention of some police.
Wow.
And they pulled me over, and I was arrested for drunk driving. And this was a second offense. The previous offense was 11 years earlier, just before I had gotten married.
Oh, okay. All right. Now, my understanding is that this event was a little bit different, though. Tell us about that.
Indeed, this was a turning point. I had enough of my Catholic faith just kind of sitting at the bottom of my thinking, and I had been to enough AA meetings and heard enough stories to have it actually take effect, I believe. I was sitting in the police cruiser, I was handcuffed, and before getting into the police cruiser, they were running me through the typical sobriety tests, and they were asking me to say my alphabet backward, and I got a little way into it, and I said, really, do we need to do this? I'm drunk and you know it, and I'm not afraid to admit it, so let's be done. And so they handcuffed me and put me in the cruiser. And as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, this is going to lead to divorce. My wife is not going to tolerate this anymore. And I'm thinking, I'm going to break out of these handcuffs. I'm going to break out of this police cruiser. I'm going to run up to my vehicle, and I'm going to elude the police. I'm going to get home and act like nothing happened. And as I had a moment of objectivity, a moment of clarity, and I thought, that's insane. It's absolutely nuts. And at that same moment, there was a peace that came over me, and I know beyond the shadow of any doubt it was the Holy Spirit just enveloped me. And I knew that it was going to be a very rough road, but I had the blessed reassurance that I was never going to drink again. I did not have to drink again, ever.
You had that in that moment right there.
Right there.
Wow.
And that's been the truth, and that's been the truth for the last 21 years.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about that recovery, that hard road that you had to endure, and how maybe that reassurance, how did that kind of play its way during that period as you're going through it?
Well, it broke me out of the understanding that God was an absentee landlord. I knew that he was right there, and I suppose it was, I don't want to say it was frightening, but it was eye-opening. It captured my attention in a way that nothing ever before had.
Sure.
And so I became curious about this God that I thought was distant, but really wasn't. And so I started to read about him, and a lot of my friends in AA were far more spiritually fit than I ever was. And so they helped me rediscover God. And actually, it's not even a rediscovery of him. It was a discovery of him and awareness of him. And like I said, looking back on my life, I can see his fingerprints all over everything. And, you know, I marvel at it today, and it blows me away. It blows me away. He's rocking my world. He's rocking my world. So they convinced me that it was a good idea to go back to school as well. So I hooked up with a sponsor. I started doing due diligence, and he worked with me going through the 12 steps. And
now, if I can just interrupt. Now, in terms of the arrest, did that lead to jail time or anything, the ramifications, or did you basically get, just more of the, get into the AA thing more seriously and
good question.
Parole and stuff like that?
That's a good question. I wound up going through divorce. As a matter of fact, the day after that happened, I was informed that I was to be out of the house by May 20, which was my daughter's first birthday. No. And so after May 20. And that was it. And I kept clinging to the hope that maybe there was something that was salvageable about the marriage, and maybe she would see something salvageable about me. But it didn't play out that way. And, as best I could, I accepted that. There are things that you don't really care for in life. You don't want to have happen, but they're going to go.
Yeah,
they're going to happen.
It's one of those things about, sin is that we can be forgiven for it, but there's still consequences.
Absolutely.
That play out.
That's it. And so that got me to working very diligently on my relationship with God. You've got two beings in a relationship. One of them's perfect, one of them's not. So when there's trouble in the relationship, guess who's at fault? The one who's not perfect. And so being painfully aware of that at that point in my life, I started doing things. When I got to the fifth step, which is admitting to God, to myself, and another human being the exact nature of my wrongs, in the Catholic circles that I run in, we call that confession, and also reconciliation.
Indeed.
So I went to a Catholic priest, and it was the most amazing event, because before I started my diatribe, I said, "Your ears are going to be bleeding by the time I get done." And he just sat there nonplussed, and he said, "Well, let's hear it." So I go on, and man, it had to be 45 minutes later. I'm shaking, and I'm a blob of protoplasm in the chair and crying, and he goes, "Is that it?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Look, no blood." And that's when I realized that God's forgiveness was real, that I was forgivable. I didn't think I was. I didn't think I was lovable. I didn't think I was forgivable. And there's a point in the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, they are put together very soundly. They're in the order that they're in for a very good reason. And I genuinely believe that the whole program of AA is divinely inspired. And the two gentlemen that are best known for developing the program, if you will, would attest to that too. And so as I'm working through the steps, I admitted I'm powerless over alcohol and I couldn't manage my own life. That was evident. That was a no-brainer. Then the coming to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. I wasn't so sure that I was ever sane to begin with, so I don't know how much that second part of that played out, but there had to be something. There was something more powerful than me, definitely. And I gave it a name. I called him God, and particularly Jesus Christ. And then getting into the third step, where I became willing to turn my life and my will over to his care, that's where I had to fake it a little bit, because I didn't know God, and I certainly don't know him now. I mean, I know I have a relationship with him, but I don't know what his next move is. I can't second guess him. So in that regard, I don't know him. But I after going through the experience of the fifth step and understanding the forgiveness that was available and how loved I truly am, I went back to that third step, and suddenly here's this loving, benevolent creator who I really want to turn my will and my life over to, because I've seen what I do with it in my hands, and it's not good. So, and it was about at that point in my life where a friend of mine came up to me and he goes, "Marty, it's really simple. It's really simple. God's plan, good. Marty's plan, bad." So, and it is simple. It really is.
Mm-hmm. And so going back from that point then, because your life obviously has done a turnaround since that point. You've been obviously trying to pursue God's plan, though it may be mysterious. You know, you were actively seeking it and trying to be open to it and that type of thing. So how's that played out?
The short story is I'm remarried.
Okay.
I was single for 10 years, and I met my wife at the St. Isidore Perpetual Adoration Chapel, and she actually got me involved in Curcio.
Okay.
And right now she is on a Curcio weekend in Pewamo at St. Joseph, and I don't work in a factory anymore.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I had technically retired from that job.
Okay.
And I was looking for another retirement job, and so I became a janitor, if you will. I worked maintenance at a school and church down the street.
Oh.
A Catholic school and church. And I had been doing that for about 4 years, and being diligent in prayer, a position opened up there, and I had been walking past the office, the empty office all the time, and it hadn't been filled, the position hadn't been filled for 3-4 weeks, and it was the DRE.
Oh my.
And so I would go into church, and in the meantime, I had gotten my bachelor's degree from Cornerstone University, of all places.
Okay.
That there's some interesting stories coming from that. And so I had gone into church, and several times there during prayer time, I felt the tap on the shoulder, I'm supposed to put my resume in for that position. So I went into our pastor and I said, I've been praying about this, and I said, I am not qualified for the position at all. But what do you think about me putting in my resume? And he rocks back in his chair and goes, yeah, I think so. And he reiterated something that I had heard earlier in Curcio, and that is, God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies those he calls. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, there are other people that are going to interview for this job. They're much younger than me. They're better educated, just better fit for the position. Mm-hmm. And long story short, I am the director of faith formation there now.
And how awesome is that?
It's spectacular.
So how long have you been in that position then?
I just clicked over a year in February.
Okay, awesome. And how's God playing into that role as you're taking on obviously a leadership role at that point in a community and a witnessing role and that type of thing? How have you taken to that?
He's teaching me how to trust him.
Uh-huh.
I'm learning to do the trust fall daily. Yeah, and that's it more than anything else. And he's making it very evident that he is intimately involved in my life, because there are circumstances that I have no understanding of how to deal with them, and it leads me to prayer. And to the best of my ability anymore, I like to try to pray without ceasing. I like to make my day a prayer. I fail miserably at it, but when I can, I do that, and the outcome is remarkable.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, are you getting pretty good feedback then from the community in terms of?
For the most part, yeah.
It seems
For the most part.
you're seeing people kind of being influenced and brought a little closer to Jesus that way. And you certainly have an excellent witness and can tell them, there's no one that is too far away.
Absolutely.
And I think
that's the truth.
That's an awesome witness to be able to share, as well as being able to share, how far you've come since accepting that and embracing Jesus' control, letting him take the reins a little bit, right?
A lot of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we are a little bit out of time, so I want to thank you for being with us. A fantastic story, and takes a lot of courage to kind of share your failings as well as the recovery and such. I know that can be kind of difficult, so I really appreciate you, being willing to do that with us, and maybe helping someone in our audience who may be going through the same thing and realizes that the bottom is there to springboard off of and get recovery from.
Yeah.
So thank you so very much.
You're very welcome, Al.
And we want to thank you as well for being with us, and we hope you found today's conversation interesting and edifying, and we'll be praying for you in the meantime until we talk again. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Qui ad te